So the songbirds are the passeriformes, which is from the volume of species, about half of all the birds on the planet. And we've been monitoring the songbird trade, in particular in Asia, because some species are traded in huge numbers. So in Asia, some species have been gone extinct in the wild because of the exploitation for the trade, for the hobby. And this is increasing in other regions of the world as well. In Europe, it's decreasing. So there's less and less hobby breeding or keeping of songbirds. But in South America, in South Africa, and particularly in Southeast Asia, it's very much increasing. You would think captive breeding is a good solution. Then you can breed them in captivity, you can fulfill the market, and you don't need to take them from the wild. But the problem is that captive breeding means that you need to own property, you need to own some land, you need to have resources like electricity and food for the birds. You need to be there every day of the year. You don't have a day off because you need to take care of these birds. So either you have staff or you do it yourself. And it's a huge effort and a huge resource. And in the end, you need to sell the birds at a reasonable price. But if there's also birds taken from the wild, so only when we prevent the wild catched birds, there's a real market for captive bred birds. Historically, the core area of songbird trade was the European Union and Europe. So in the 1990s up to 2000, this was the epicentrum of keeping and breeding songbirds, the most species, the most people involved. And in Southeast Asia, there has been a very long tradition that goes back maybe 100 years of keeping a bird in your house, but it's not been in the volume that it is now. And in recent years, there's a shift in Asia. There's more and more people who can afford to keep birds as a hobby, but there's also a growing passion for keeping birds, not only for leisure, but also for sports. And that's really songbird competitions. So they compete with each other. And that's a new thing in Indonesia. In the last 20 years, this has been growing and growing. Also government agencies doing some effort. But the amount of people, the volume of people involved is huge. And it's a popular thing. You know, some of these breeding competition associations have 100,000 members. And there was a little girl who told me, she was from England, but she said, if we would ask them not to keep birds, it would be like them asking us not to watch football. Exactly. It's the level of interest which it has, and we need to find means of changing the behavior of taking the birds from the wild. We need to, of course, enforce the laws to protect the species that are most vulnerable. And this is a complex issue. The world, in terms of communication, have become smaller. A lot of this trade happens online. And the connection via Facebook with the whole world allows people in Asia, of course, to export and import birds as well. And we see the most demanded species from Indonesia, they are now sourced from the neighboring countries, especially Malaysia. So there's a big, mostly illegal trade over the borders to Malaysia from the most commonly kept species, which they already know. But there's a hunger in the area for species which are unknown, which are not yet common in Indonesia. And that's particularly from Africa. So large numbers of African birds are imported to Indonesia. And these are singing finches or glossy starlings, so typical African species. And you find these in the Indonesian market. And what you also find more and more is birds from New Guinea. So you find a whole range of species that are endemic to the island of New Guinea. So there's a big network of birds coming from different countries. And of course, also leaving Indonesia, because this is the same network. So birds are going out of Indonesia via the Philippines or Taiwan or even to Europe. There's actually little to no difference in the in the ways and the motivations. The people are fascinated by birds. People like birds, and that often leads into that. You know, you grow up, your grandfather has a bird, and you find this interesting and exciting, and you appreciate the bird. But also the sport is a aspect of it. The first publications about this, where some awareness was very few around year 2000, just before and just after. Some people are saying, "Oh, there's a lot of trade going on here," but not combining it with species disappearing. And the first really important publications on species disappearing, that was around 2012, 2013. So it's not that long ago. But that was when the scientists realized that something is going wrong. So the last 20 years has been the hardest on the birds in Indonesia. And only the last 10 years, we really start to understand something's going on. And only in the last 5 years, we're starting to do something against it. We have species which have disappeared, and particular subspecies which have been lost. But of course, they don't have the same value in the conservation aspect. They don't have a red list, but some subspecies have been lost due to the trade. But there's also species like the Javan pied starling, which now only survives in captivity. And when it's gone in the wild, the people seem to be able to breed them for commercial purposes in good numbers, but only when they're gone in the wild. As long as they're in the wild, it's still easier to harvest them. And there's a few other species which is really on the brink, where we really talk about small numbers of less than 200 birds. And 200 birds of a small passerine, that's another disaster. What we're doing is the fire brigade solution. So at the moment, the most urgent things, the most threatened species, we try to do captive breeding. We try to set up breeding centers or rehabilitation centers in the region, not in the European zoos in Europe, but in Southeast Asia, or especially in Indonesia. And of course, this is just, you know, a drop on the hot stone, like you say. It's just to make sure they don't go extinct right now, to save time, so that in the future we can do more efforts in education and in understanding. And for this effort, maybe a whole generation have to turn over for people to change their attitude. I was approached several times by people in Indonesia, Indonesians working in the government, telling us, yeah, but in Europe, you also have these problems. Maybe less, but you also have these problems. What do you do about this in Europe? How can you come here to Indonesia and tell us about how we should do it if you don't solve these problems in your home countries? And even though the trade in Europe may be smaller and maybe the species not as threatened, I feel today it's extremely important that we solve our own problems as well, and that we use a role model function for the whole world and for ourselves to make evident that we care, because only then we can demand that others care if we do it ourselves. And I think this is the essence of why we also need to direct our views at what we do ourselves and what is happening in Europe.